It's raining. Come on, it's raining.
Okay, very good.
Sluggo never gets tired of teasing the entire state of Minnesota. I think
I
it might be a Michigan thing.
I love Minnesota. I really do. Okay, 1 minute. Anybody want to sip something in for 1 minute? Anton Frelix, is that the Chicago Cubs behind you, the emblem? But what team is that?
Anton?
Anton,
Oh, he's
Yes, can you
muted.
hear me? Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah,
what team is
that
that?
looks like
Chicago
the
Bears.
Bears.
It's the
Oh,
Bears.
that's the Bears.
I
The Bears.
All right, good for you. Dustin, the last word. It's 5 o'clock, but you got a couple of seconds.
TikTok. No.
Dustin?
American Democracy Summit is in a couple of months. That's put on by Represent.us. And they are experts in passing legislation that enables people to have power at the ballot box.
Great. We'll bring
Beautiful.
that up in the second hour.
I wish I could attend, but I can't.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeffrey, we don't need a comment on everything.
Right.
Sorry.
We have both Greg Mitchell and Carl Grossman with us, two of your heavyweights here. So whenever you're ready to rock and roll, Mike or Steve, we can go live. Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back for the 145th, count of 145 Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom calls. We are joined in the first hour. We're going to talk with the great Greg Mitchell, one of the premier journalists in this country, on the especially on the topic of popular music and rock and roll, and also Carl Grossman, one of the great resources on nuclear issues. We're also expecting Seth from International Physicians for Social Responsibility, I believe, and I don't see him on yet. And then we're also going to have Tatanka. There is a hearing in California. Oh, Sheldon, you're with us. Seth, rather. There is a hearing in California tomorrow that Tatanka is going to give the coordinates for, that everybody can participate, whether you're in California or not. It's important on Diablo Canyon. Can you all hear me all right? And then the second hour, we're going to speak on with Joel Siegel, the great Joel Siegel, on issues of homelessness and healthcare. We're also going to deal with Common Cause on democracy issues and other stuff. So stick with us for the 2 hours, if you will. Just a housekeeping note: the first hour of these Zooms is rebroadcast or podcast on the Progressive Radio Network, PRN.live, and it has been for the past few years at 5 o'clock Eastern time on Thursday, and it's now moving to 9 o'clock at Eastern time on Thursday, just so you know, won't be exposed to the children. Anyway, so 9 o'clock instead of 5 o'clock at PRN, and they get the first hour re-podcast on that. Tatanka, when you come on, raise your hand. We can announce the coordinates of the hearing in California on Diablo Canyon, which is happening tomorrow. We're also joined here by Falabi Olagbaju, who's from Greenpeace, and will be on with us the second hour to talk about the Greenpeace democracy campaign. Falabi, great to have you with us again. Kat Kramer is with us from LA. Kathy Wolf from New England. Kathy, great to have you from the Clamshell Alliance. Rhonda Roth from Florida. And Seth, I believe you are with us from, you'll identify yourself. I will tell everybody that I did go see the Seth Sheldon, you're with us. If you can put your coordinates in the chat, you'll follow Greg Mitchell, who's going to come on right now, and then Carl Grossman after you. I will say that I did go see the Oppenheimer movie last night. I was actually in a theater where I was on a couch, for God's sakes. It was really amazing. And I could have ordered food, but anyway, I will give one very important piece of advice about the Oppenheimer film, which is never go into Fort Lee, New Jersey on a Sunday. I've never seen something like that. Man, it was like hours and hours, and I was lucky to get a parking space. But that's irrelevant to those of you who are not in New Jersey. We are joined now by Tatanka and Greg and Seth, if you don't mind, very briefly, Tatanka is going to tell us there's a hearing tomorrow, Tatanka, in California on Diablo Canyon. It will be online, so you don't have to be in California to participate. But can you give us, Tatanka, the coordinates for this?
Yes, it's going to be 2 p.m. This is the one public hearing to hear how people feel about the reopening of Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. It's going to be tomorrow, Tuesday, 2 p.m. Pacific time. I will put the link in the chat. Best to get on early, like up to 1:30, and then wait place in line. They'll tell us how many seconds you have. It's 15 or 30 or a minute. I don't know what it is. And Linda Seeley of Mothers for Peace cautioned us that the Mothers for Nukes are very well organized. They're going to be out in force. So it's important that all of us weigh in as many of us as can.
Okay, so and remember, everybody in the United States is downwind from Diablo Canyon. So
That's
do
right.
not feel restrained from because you're not actually in California. And of course, that we know the name Mothers for Nukes. That's not the full. There's another syllable after mothers, and so everybody should understand that. Okay, thank you for that, Tatanka. Do stay with us. It's going to be Greg Mitchell, Seth Sheldon from ICANN, and then Carl Grossman, and then we will defer to women after this. But the movie Oppenheimer, I saw on TV. They're booming in the theaters.
I saw it yesterday. It's fantastic.
Yes, I saw it too. And so, Greg Mitchell, you have written a review of this movie in the Los Angeles Times. That's about as high a praise it can get. Tell us what you think of Oppenheimer, and then Seth Sheldon, you'll join us from ICANN, and Carl Grossman. Go ahead, and Greg, put your creds in the chat. You have an astounding resume. You're one of the great writers in the United States today, certainly about rock and roll. And go ahead and give us your appraisal of this movie, Oppenheimer. And we're going to do this in a full hour, by the way. We have a full hour on this, so don't forget that people can chime in as well. Go ahead, Greg.
Okay. Am I on? Can you hear me?
You are rolling, Bob.
Sluggo left out the fact that I also was a former editor of his, because he wrote pieces for me at Crawdaddy and at Politics Magazine, and possibly at Nuclear Times also in the late 70s and early 80s. And I was the editor of Nuclear Times from 82 to 86 after a long stint at Crawdaddy. And, I've gone on to write a dozen books, 3 of them on nuclear issues related to the bomb, Atomic Cover-Up, Hiroshima in America with the great Robert J. Lifton. That was in 1995. And then just recently, my book that is more directly related to the Oppenheimer movie, you might say, called The Beginning or the End, which is the same title as the first Hollywood movie on the bomb in 1947, which, in a nutshell, basically started, there goes the phone, I'm sorry, which basically started as a warning to the world from atomic scientists. And once MGM got a hold of it and gave script approval to General Leslie Groves at the Pentagon and President Truman in the White House, the movie was turned around completely. So it became basically pro-bomb propaganda. Truman ordered a scene retake. He had got the actor playing him fired, and so forth. And Oppenheimer basically caved, signed off on it, and allowed himself to be depicted and serve as narrator in this drama through an actor. And even though they're incredible falsehoods, almost laughable falsehoods in the film, but it was really no laughing matter. But anyway, that's my resume and books. I also wrote and directed a rather well-known film 2 years ago called Atomic Cover Up, which won several awards, played in 20 festivals around the world and so forth. And now this year, besides writing for the LA Times, I had 2 pieces in Mother Jones in the past week. I had a piece in LitHub, which talked about the rival film to it, that MGM classic I just mentioned, which came from Paramount, and they hired Ayn Rand as a screenwriter. Fortunately, that movie never got off the ground. But and then today, if you want to check out, I had a long segment on Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, which is now up on their site. So fortunately, and I also started a daily newsletter blog called Oppenheimer from Hiroshima to Hollywood that's gotten very popular in 12 days. It's every day I have material about Oppenheimer, the man, the movie, the bomb, and all related subjects. And so that's really caught on. So, I mean, I'm fortunate I've had a voice in all of this new attention for Oppenheimer, for nuclear dangers, whatever good may come of it. And so that's my intro. Now I suppose you want to know what I think of the movie. Although many of you have seen it, I think, or some of you anyway. I mean, basically, I saw an early screening in New York City. Christopher Nolan actually was on a panel afterwards talking about it. So I got some from the horse's mouth sort of insight. It's based on a tremendous bio written by 2 friends of mine, Kai Bird and Marty Sherwin, the late Marty Sherwin. I've heard about this book from Marty going back, I don't know, 30 years now. He couldn't quite get to the writing it, and so they brought on Kai Bird, who's a great writer and biographer, and together they finished the book, and it won a Pulitzer Prize. And Christopher Nolan, as he told us, used the book as his guide when he sat down to write the screenplay. Very unusual situation, even though he's a top drawer director who can do practically anything he wants. He sat down and wrote the screenplay based almost solely on this book, and then sold the idea of the movie. So the movie is indeed, for Hollywood fare, relatively accurate. Accurate in its scenes, accurate in many of its incidents. And that's admirable. And I think Nolan's heart is in the right place. And I think in the end, it does make a strong plea for against nuclear threats, nuclear dangers, controlling the bomb, warnings for the future. I just have problems with it, as I've written over and over now in the past 2 weeks, with various omissions and the way it handles certain things, particularly from my perspective. I'm not the average moviegoer. I'm an avid moviegoer, but I'm not an average moviegoer, in that my focus on the nuclear issue from the beginning has been on the making and the use of the bomb against Japan, the aftermath of the use of the bomb in Japan, the aftermath in America. My book with Lifton was all about the aftermath in America. So my focus has been on how does it handle the actual use of the bomb, and then what happened afterwards. And so a lot of my concerns about the movie have to do with that, which may not be your concerns. It might not be the average concerns. And like I said, a lot of people feel it's, makes a tremendous statement, and, they don't have any issues with it, and they think it's all positive. But for me, like, take a deep breath here. My concerns, as I said on Democracy Now! Today, is the various omissions that did not get into the movie. So one thing is, I know a subject I'm sure you've covered here quite a bit, is radiation. It barely mentions the radiation factor, which is hard to believe in the movie about the bomb. For example, the Trinity test, which gets a great focus in the movie. Filmmakers love the Trinity test because you can show this great technical stuff, pyrotechnics. It's a great success. People celebrate. It's a wonderful scientific achievement, and no one died, at least that day. Hiroshima and Nagasaki is another matter. 160,000 civilians died. probably. So they love to focus on Trinity, as every Hollywood movie has, including Nolan's movie. So we don't see the radioactive cloud that came out of Trinity. We don't see the local residents not warned or evacuated. We don't see the cover up that Oppenheimer participated in of the health effects afterwards. We don't get Groves laughing about the radiation disease in Japan, where he said he thinks it'd be a rather pleasant way to die of radiation disease. So we don't see any of that. And of course, I mean, it could go on and on about the downwinders and the cover-ups in the decades since, and how many people, and atomic soldiers and atomic workers, and that's a 3-hour program right there. So that's one kind of omission. The second one is he never shows the results of the bomb on the people in Japan. You get a couple very fleeting images where he has one of his many visions in the movie, which are always a little hard to make sense of what's going on in his brief visions. So he has a vision of a young woman with her face is burnt. A kind of a little note here that actually is Christopher Nolan's daughter. He cast his own daughter as the one Japanese victim that we see. But we don't see now. People have said, some people have said, that Nolan's vision was that this movie is totally from Oppenheimer's perspective, and Nolan has said this. It didn't fit the theme of the tone of the movie to show the Japanese victims, because this is supposed to be what Oppenheimer saw, and of course Oppenheimer wasn't there, in Japan at the time. The two problems with that excuse is, number one, we do see probably too much of the movie is basically Robert Downey as Louis Strauss, and we cut away from Oppenheimer, and the last hour of the movie is more Downey than Cillian Murphy. And number two, we do see Oppenheimer actually in a screening room shortly after Hiroshima, looking at a screen where, from the brief narrative, they're describing, we think maybe some footage from Hiroshima. And it goes about 30 seconds, and you see Oppenheimer get a little disturbed as he's watching, but you don't see the screen at all. So, again, if the excuse is this is supposed to be a movie from Oppenheimer's perspective, you could have turned the camera around and showed him watching the screen, which Nolan did not do. That's another thing that's omitted. Another thing that's omitted virtually, not completely, is Nagasaki. We get, my wife and I both had to laugh because we went more than 2 hours into the movie with no mention of Nagasaki. And this goes back to MGM's The Beginning or the End, which I wrote my book about, where Nagasaki isn't mentioned even once. So we get 2 hours into the movie, and suddenly there's almost like a parenthetical reference to Nagasaki, and then a little later there's another little parenthetical reference to Nagasaki. And so the tragedy of Nagasaki is barely in the film, and in fact it's kind of a little more surprising, because in real life, Oppenheimer was not much moved by what happened to Hiroshima, and these famous regrets that he allegedly came to have only came about after he learned more about Nagasaki and maybe saw some footage Nagasaki. So that's out of the film.
Well, there's a famous quote, and Greg, let me get you another couple minutes, and then we're going to go to Seth, who's waiting. There's a famous quote from Kissinger, who said that they used the bomb in Hiroshima to show that we had the bomb and would use it. And we used it at Nagasaki to show we would use it irrationally.
Yeah, it's like Nixon, the madman theory with Nixon. I'll just mention one more thing, because one of the most important things.
We'll come back to you, but we want to go for Seth. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, just the one, because one of the most important things is that the film actually sustains what I call the official narrative, or the Hiroshima narrative, that's been held sway since 1945. You really don't, except for very little odd things here and there. It basically sustains the same narrative we've had since 1945. Oppenheimer, of course, doesn't really challenge it, and so the film, it does. When you get to the end, you do feel it is making an anti-nuclear warning. You do get the sense that Oppenheimer is haunted by something. But you don't really know what exactly he's haunted by. And certainly he was not, in the movie, you don't see him specifically haunted by Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is accurate because in real life, right to the end of his life, he rarely really said anything really critical of that decision.
As opposed to Dwight Eisenhower, who did. Thank you, Greg. Very good. We will come back to you. Really an honor to have you with us. Seth Sheldon from ICANN. If you'll tell us what ICANN is, how we can get a hold of your organization, and why you're overdressed, we'll be glad. We're glad to have you on. It's really good. Thank you. I think you're only the second or third person to wear a tie on our Zoom call, so you're welcome to take it off at any time. Seth, go ahead, please.
I was just trying to class up the joint. I thought maybe everyone else would put some clothes, some formal wear on for me.
You certainly succeeded. And we have 59 people, so feel comfortable, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm for better and for worse, I have to dress like this, and I'll tell you why. But yeah, I work for ICANN, as you said. We are the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. We're a coalition of non-governmental organizations. Really, we have today over 650 partner organizations in 111 countries, and we all work on stigmatizing and prohibiting, eliminating nuclear weapons using the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So this is a UN treaty, and that a lot of people in the US don't know much about or talk much about, and I could talk more about why that is, but it's and I work as our UN liaison, so I'm at the UN most of the day and feel like I have to dress the part. But we work on this treaty, and the treaty, in case you haven't heard of it, it's the first ever treaty that is globally applicable, that establishes a comprehensive ban on nuclear weapons. So anything to do with nuclear weapons, developing them, obtaining them from others, using them, of course, threatening to use them, as well as assisting anyone else with engaging any of the prohibited activities. It provides a framework for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and also related, I think, to this discussion on radiation, it does more than seek to prevent this future harm from nuclear weapons. It also seeks to address past harm. It's the first ever treaty dealing with nuclear weapons that provides an obligation for its states parties to assist people and environments that have been affected by past use and testing of nuclear weapons. So most of the world supports this treaty. It actually has the support of around 2/3 of the world states, not the US, of course. So if this is a US audience, then that goes to why you probably haven't been thinking too much about this. But we have a plan, and we think it's working, and we can demonstrably show already the effect that the treaty is having in terms of making us finally more safe from nuclear weapons and reversing this terrible status quo. About the movie, should I talk a bit about my reflections on Oppenheimer as well?
Put the link to your organization in the chat, please.
Yeah, okay, no problem. I mean, I'll say that, first I'll say here, and then I'll put in the chat that you can find us at icanw.org, icanw.org. And you can follow us on all the socials at Nuclear Ban. And I guess I left out one of the many things I might say about the work that we're doing, which is that in 2017, we won the Nobel Peace Prize for our work to raise awareness for any consequences from any use of the humanitarian consequences from any use of nuclear weapons, and also for our work to advance this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. That was a bit of a boost and to our work, but we're still slogging away at finally making this treaty. Now we're implementing it and trying to use it to put pressure on the people on the other side of this issue. And I think when it comes to a movie like Oppenheimer, it's it presents a real opportunity to take that conversation forward, an opportunity, maybe, as I've been calling it. But in the end, I would say, and I think I align with Greg's very insightful perspectives on this, that although from a cinematic perspective, I think you could certainly say that there's a lot of great achievements in this movie. It tells a really important story. It's got this, blockbuster cast who are a lot of brilliant actors, and they're all trying to tell this important story. But in the end, I think it's the wrong story. I think that, you can't look at a movie like this only from how good it is at telling a story. I think this movie needs to be evaluated for its message and what it's trying to do. And when I say this too, I appreciate what Greg said. I don't mean to undermine that the movie gets a lot of things historically accurate. I think it does as well. And nor do I mean to question whether or not Nolan's heart may be in the right place. I think it very well may and be. But I think the omissions that Greg speaks a little bit about I agree. And I think that it really undermines the work that is being done to reverse this problem, the way the story is told, because of how it's framed. I mean, of course, it's called Oppenheimer, and you have to thus tell the story of Oppenheimer and view things from his perspective. But the way that is done and the way it's framed, I mean, I think there's a worthy argument from a cinematic perspective, even, that the main premise of the film is that the true injustice that's done in the movie we watch is that Oppenheimer's security clearance is not renewed. Like that's the injustice. The way I believe the story is told, instead of the millions of people who have died and continue to suffer from the results of the Manhattan Project. And yes, I say millions because this story in its omissions also advances another. Sorry, I think there's some weird noise. Advances another, misconception, which is that nuclear weapons were used twice. Nuclear weapons were not used twice. There have been over 2,000 nuclear weapons tests. And again, not that this movie needs to tell the story of all of those tests, but it doesn't even fully tell the story of the first test. And in doing so, it erases the story of those who are affected, when we should really start there. We should really start by, if we want to understand what the weapons do, we have to have some attention paid to those who it's been done to. And, Greg talks about the scene where we see, Hiroshima being described, the effects of the US dropping the bomb on Hiroshima being described. And we're watching, but basically evaluating that from the perspective of Oppenheimer and whether or not he, is guilty or what he feels about it. But we never see anything reflected from, to give us a perspective on what happened to them in Japan. We also never see, as Greg was also saying, what happened to the people in New Mexico. And it's not just the erasure. Is actually, I would argue that it's missed. It's almost, I don't know why Nolan would mistell it so much, but for instance, there are all these shots of Oppenheimer riding these horses through an empty New Mexico. Several scenes of it while they're evaluating the site for use for the Los Alamos, project, which perpetuates, of course, obviously perpetuates this misbelief that no one was living there and no one was harmed. People lived there. Their homes were bulldozed. There are some people who tell the story talking about how they shot their horses and then rehired them to work on the project that then in turn caused them to get sick, caused their children to get sick, their children's children, these intergenerational harms. There's stories told about how, the white people who were brought in to work on this project were given gloves to work with the radioactive material, but not the indigenous people, were given no protective gear. And I think ultimately this is framing the story in a way that minimizes the harms and that then directs us to assume that, wow, these are so terrible, but they served a necessary purpose and it's a good thing we have them. and all these misconceptions that I think are perpetuated in part because we're not telling the story of who's harmed. And there's so many opportunities that were missed to do so. I think the story of because I think when US people see this movie, they're like, well, they evaluate strictly through who needed to be killed and why. And you could say that the first people that were killed were Americans with this bomb. I mean, that this Trinity test just taken alone, even if we hadn't used it elsewhere. There was the New York Times published a new study just last week that reveals that fallout from Trinity actually spread to 46 US states. So it went further, and we're always understanding that, the impact was even more devastating than we ever assumed. That's not to put it all on the scientists, who may or may not have known the full effects, but it is to put some responsibility on the filmmakers here to just totally ignore that. So I would say, I have a lot of resources, and I'm absorbing them as well from the people that we work with who are helping, give these other perspectives and some counterpoint to the just, glitzy Hollywood interpretation of this story. But I think that you could start with our website, ICANN's website, and hopefully that helps point people in the right direction. Because I will concede that there are moments, of course, where Nolan tells the helpful perspective, that Oppenheimer, for example, later, of course, did support arms control and had some understanding, at least you would say, of how terrible this was. And you would hope that viewers would, take the protagonist's view and maybe be inspired by that. There's no spoilers, but the end of the movie does sort of try to point you in the right direction. But I think that the 3 hours that preceded the end really undercuts that potential message that I think Nolan may be trying to help lead us to. And from my perspective, things I've read, things I've heard people say to me, they're not getting what you would hope they would get out of a story like this.
Thank you for that. I hope we can stay with us, Seth. We're going to go to Carl Grossman in a minute. I do want to very quickly point out the movie never mentions that the Japanese were trying to surrender. It never mentions that before the bombs, that never mentions that the US military continues to this day to refer to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as announced nuclear tests, and that both Hiroshima and Nagasaki were preserved so that they would provide really definitive aerial photographs. And Stimson is shown accurately mentioning that they did preserve Kyoto because his wife had been there and liked the temples. And I've been to Kyoto, and I'm really glad they didn't bomb it, but that was in there. I also want to mention, I'm sure Carl will mention this, Louis Strauss, who is made the heavy in this movie, and way too much time, as far as I'm concerned, is devoted to his evilness. Louis Strauss is the guy who coined the phrase "too cheap to meter" for atomic power. He was the head of the AEC, and he's the one who foisted commercial atomic power on this country with the myth that it would wind up being, free energy. So, and they never mentioned that, but I can understand that. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Greg. Stay with us, please, if you can. We have 70 people on the call. Carl Grossman is one of our great experts on nuclear power and radiation, and certainly knows a lot about Louis Strauss, living in near the facility on Long Island. Carl Grossman, you've written many, many books about nuclear power. What did you think of the movie?
Well, from my perspective, despite the shortcomings that have been noted, I think the film is a very effective instrument. I mean, the people I work with, I live with, are kids. I've been a professor for 45 years, and it's been more than a half a century since the Dr. Strangelove film, which my students, or the day after, on ABC. It's a very well done. It's a very well done production, particularly the effects and the music. and it's going to have a big audience, which is colossal to me. I mean, when such a movie comes out, sometimes because of this or because of that, it opens in 7 theaters or 17 theaters, but not hundreds of theaters. In terms of on a personal level, beyond my being for the abolition of nuclear weapons and the end of nuclear power and how they're all connected has been a stress in my work for a long time. I have personal connections. I'm sitting here in Sag Harbor, New York, which is 7 air miles from Nassau Point, where Einstein signed the letter, which was basically written by Leo Szilard. In fact, I syndicate a column on Long Island, and I'll mention that story. I've been to Los Alamos. I was a judge for years for the Nuclear Free Future Awards, and in 1999, the awards were given out in Fuller Lodge, which is the big building, which was the biggest building that was part of the original Manhattan Project complex. In fact, several of the scenes in the film are shot in Fuller Lodge. I don't know how Klaus Biegert, the head of the Nuclear Free Future Awards program, was able to get the go-ahead, considering what the event was about, to have it in Fuller Lodge in Los Alamos. Let me note that one of the people in attendance was Peter Oppenheimer, who was a carpenter, an anti-nuke carpenter in Los Alamos, and he was thrilled with the conference. Later on, I stayed, and this is back to contemporary reality, in a motel about 2 blocks away, and would you believe the walls were lined with photos of nuclear bombs exploding. And let me just end by saying that yesterday, would it be yesterday? It would be, yeah, yesterday or the day before, Saturday, the day after the film opened, I do a national television show, Enviro Close-Up, distributed by Free Speech TV out of Colorado. And my guest on Saturday was no other than Seth Sheldon. And he was, to get a half-an-hour program, and it could have been 3 hours, with Seth Sheldon about the importance of the treaty. I mean, this is the way out, is in my view. This is how to put the genie back in the bottle. I mean, this treaty eliminating nuclear weapons, if the whole world can join together, and as Seth just mentioned, 2/3 of the world have, to end the building, the use, the threat of, and so forth, of nuclear weapons, does what the series of treaties after World War I, which abolished chemical warfare, hasn't worked perfectly, but an important treaty putting the chemical weapons genie back in the bottle, is a model for what this new treaty can do, which would be to truly, if the world can get together, if this country and China and Russia and the other 6 nuclear states, which are now supporting the treaty, would, with, I would hope, public pressure, say, yes, let's sign on, let's eliminate this madness, let's eliminate nuclear suicide, nuclear annihilation. Wow. And I think this movie, for its shortcomings, will help.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. We're going to do another round. Two things have always bothered me. Well, many things have bothered me about the making of the atomic bomb. If we were so concerned about Germany getting a nuclear weapon, why, instead of building our own nuclear weapon, didn't we spend the $2 billion to infiltrate Nazi Germany and make sure that they didn't build a bomb? I mean, it turns out history indicates strongly that the Germans never got the bomb because the guy in charge of the German program, Heisenberg, who may be one of the world's greatest heroes, sabotaged the program. You know, why is our response to Germany getting a nuclear bomb building our own bomb? Wow, what's that going to help? What would have helped was if they poured, and they did. There's a very famous person named Mo Berg, who was a catcher for the Boston Red Sox, and who also had a tremendous brain. And they sent him into Germany with orders to kill Werner Heisenberg if he thought that would prevent the Germans from getting a nuclear bomb. And he actually had dinner with Heisenberg, and he had the opportunity to kill Heisenberg, and he decided not to because he had a sense that Heisenberg actually might prevent the Germans from getting the bomb. So why was our response to Germany getting the bomb building our own bomb? It made no sense. And look at the consequences. As Einstein himself said, Einstein said later that if he had known the Germans would not get a bomb, he would have never lifted a finger for the Americans to get the bomb. And he later said, wondered if the world would have been better off if he had been a plumber. And maybe it would have, you know. So there you go. I wanted to raise that. Let me, Seth, you raise the hand, then Greg. Go ahead quickly, Seth and Greg.
Yeah, I don't know if you were soliciting our responses to that question, but
Well, yes,
I'm happy to try, because I mean, I think you pose an interesting question. I still think the better question is if our goal was to build a bomb to prevent the Germans from getting the bomb, which I agree, I don't know what the logic exactly of that is, but let's say that was, we argue that that was a valid strategy. How does it justify using it in Japan, a country that was never close to getting the bomb and was likely to surrender in the coming days either way, and because of the because of Russia's intervention in the war at that point on the Japan side. And the real reason, of course, the answer is that our use was not actually relevant to making Japan surrender. It was relevant to fighting the next war with the Russians.
Exactly. And I will say, and Greg, I'll go to you in a sec, Jimmy Burns, who was Truman's chief advisor, told Truman that if he didn't use the bombs, he'd be impeached because they spent $2 billion on him. And if the war ended and he had spent $2 billion on these two bombs and they didn't use them, people would have been furious with him. And that's
there's a lot of motivation for using the bomb. I don't fall. I know some people will light on one reason or another. Some people say it was purely to experiment using the two bombs. There's all sorts of things there. I've never embraced one. I think it's a constellation of things. But certainly in the Nolan movie, probably the one who had the biggest effect of all was Leslie Groves, and here he's portrayed in the movie by good guy Matt Damon, who he's like a hard driving military guy, all the cliches, but he's nowhere near the ogre that Groves really was.
exactly.
And in fact, we could talk about why did we even start to build a bomb, but the fact is we had a chance to not use it. And just briefly, my point, what's always motivated me going back to when I first met Harvey 100 years ago, was that besides killing all these women and children in Japan, it's the example that's set for the 78 years since. And I always come back to the fact that we still have a first use policy, a first strike policy, as do many other countries. We still have a policy that we can use the bomb in response to any international crisis or conventional attack. And most people in the media, most people in power in Washington, officials, they kind of wring their hands and they say, we must never use nuclear weapons again. They are not to be used. But then they'll turn around and make these two exceptions. And so my point going back all these decades is, as long as you're making exceptions for first use against an enemy, and embracing it, as we see in the media every year, basically coming down on, we had to use the bomb and the only thing that ended the war, it makes all the more likely that we'll use them again. So you may think that this is an academic question. You can't bring back the dead. Why do people still debate the decision to use the bomb? It's over and done with. And that may have been Nolan's view, because he certainly leaves the issue quickly. But the fact is, it's a legacy for today. It's a lesson for today that you can make exceptions to using the bomb. And We've all heard Putin in recent months talk about the Ukraine war, and whenever we lecture him about not going nuclear, he'll say, "Well, who's the only country that's used the bomb?" You know,
Right.
and so it kind of gets him off the hook a bit, off the hook a bit.
Yes, very dangerously. So we're going to turn it over. Carl, did you want to jump in, or I want to say something too?
Just a quick little thing, Harvey. There was that raid on the heavy water plant in Norway,
Right.
you know, but you know, what you said is still very, very important.
Yeah, the book about the question of Heisenberg is called "The Catcher Was a Spy." It's about Moberg. Really fascinating. I want to add one more dimension here, Seth, since you're at the United Nations. Louis Strauss, I debated his granddaughter in Cleveland, and she denied that he ever said too cheap to meet her, but we know he did. I question whether, I think there were plenty of people who knew that the radioactive fallout would have been lethal. There are people who, there was a guy who died at the University of Chicago of the graphite reactor from radiation. I think they knew, at least some of them knew, that the fallout would be deadly. And
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, he
Yeah,
could
100%.
but there's no question they knew it would be deadly. It was a question of how deadly.
right. And then when people started dying, the military denied it. They denied that radiation could kill people in their public statements. But soon it was, well, John Hershey's book, when he went into Hiroshima, actually blew the cover on that. But Seth, you at the United Nations, I want to put in a plug. As far as I'm concerned, the biggest danger to the world right now is the instability of the 6 reactors of Zaporizhia. And we have no idea what kind of shape they're in. It's we've never seen 6 atomic reactors in a war zone before. And there is a petition circulating begging the United Nations to send in a security force and to turn Zaporizhia into a demilitarized zone. And I hope, you know, as the offshoot of the nuclear bomb, and of course they never talk about commercial atomic power in this film, which he had ample opportunity to do that, and for whatever reason chose not to. And Louis Strauss was the great bad guy in that. But nonetheless, I hope that there's discussion at the UN on Zaporizhia, because I am terrified. You know, there's time these plants could be bombed, they could lose water. There was a dam bomb there, as you know, and they could lose power. And God forbid, there is way more radiation could be released at Zaporizhia that was released at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, even at Chernobyl and Fukushima. So put that in your notebook if you would, please. Do you want to say anything about that before we move on?
Well, I don't disagree that there's a tremendous risk that Zaporizhia is attacked, or that it's, you know, it is used as an atomic weapon of sorts. I don't think that, you know, I think it's at some point a little bit, I don't know, it's certainly quite dark to sort of predict what's the greatest danger to humanity. I think that I still think that the actual use of a nuclear weapon, and so especially one that prompts the exchange of nuclear weapons, and given let's not forget that the nuclear weapons in the arsenals today are up to hundreds of times more powerful in general than the ones that were used for Trinity and also in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, we see some discussion, a lot of the movie actually does revolve around the development of the hydrogen bomb, which would happen, you know, later. But the development of the hydrogen bomb is what enabled these vastly more destructive weapons that make the weapons that were used for Trinity and Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like, you know, ancient technology, actually, by comparison. So I guess if you made me, I would say that that's still the exchange of those weapons is still a greater risk than an attack on Zaporizhia. But you're right that actually still poses an enormous risk. And yes, you're also right that that's something that's discussed every day, actually, at the UN, including at the Security Council for almost on a weekly basis at Security Council, and that the IAEA is engaged very closely there with trying to secure the facility and make it as safe as possible. But I think, yes, a nuclear power plant under attack is an enormous risk to all humanity.
Especially when you have 6 reactors and 6 fuel pools. The analogy would be Suez in '56, when the peacekeeping troops were sent in and made a huge difference. A peacekeeping operation, a demilitarized zone at Zaporizhia. I hope it happens, and maybe your group would consider dealing with it. Okay, we've had all white guys for the last Lynn, then Wendy, and then Mary. Go ahead, Lynn, please, and then Wendy, and then Mary. Lynn Feinerman, are you unmuted? Go ahead.
Now I'm unmuted, yes. Yeah, in fact, the US, just as a side comment, the US not only didn't go in and try to assassinate or control the nuclear program in Germany, they brought all the Nazi scientists here. And there is an incredible story about a bunch of Jewish American kids who entered the military and were actually assigned to host all of these Nazi scientists and to get them whatever they wanted and to treat them as if they were kings. And they lived on military bases that could hardly be called military bases. That's an aside. I'm still not sure what Greg Mitchell means when he says that the movie just gave us the same narrative, quote unquote. I would like a clarification, because I thought that what he was referring to was the cover-up of the fact that Japan had already effectively surrendered. But it doesn't seem like that's what he's saying. So I would like a clarification from Greg on that.
Greg, go for it.
Well, there's no mention of Japan trying to surrender and things like that. It's basically that the film, the key scene in the film in terms of the use of the bomb is actually quite factual. There was the interim committee, which is Truman's top advisory committee, met at the end of May, and very briefly talked about, well, are there any alternatives to using the bomb? And Oppenheimer shot down the idea of a demonstration. He was sort of the lead person doing that. And then instead of the scene just ending there, they have one of the other members of the committee, it might have been a military officer, I don't recall, gave what's basically been the Hiroshima narrative since 1945, which was, if we didn't use the bomb, we would have a bloody invasion of Japan and hundreds of thousands of American boys would die, and only the use of the bomb could prevent that. And that is that's the most powerful statement in that whole part of the movie. And of course, we know that invasion was not scheduled for 3 months, and there are all sorts of things which we don't have time to go into that could have happened very shortly, that where invasion would have never happened of all the options Truman had, including using several bombs later. Kai Erickson made the great point decades ago that there's no way in the world Truman would have ever ordered an invasion once the bomb was tested successfully at Trinity. The option was to use the weapon immediately and quickly, or wait, and then before a bloody invasion he could always drop 1 bomb or 5 bombs. So that's my point about that meeting, that is sort of the sustaining the Hiroshima narrative, because it's never really contradicted afterwards.
One of the few laugh lines in the movie, at least I laughed, was Szilard or somebody said that our secret weapon against the German nuclear program was anti-Semitism.
Right. I thought you were going to say actually the biggest clunker in the whole movie is when they somehow find a way to inject one reference to John F. Kennedy, Senator John F. Kennedy.
Yeah,
that's a real howler, say, okay, you got that in. It got as much time as Nagasaki, but
they were right about anti-Semitism. If it hadn't been for anti-Semitism, Einstein would have still been in Germany. Of course, he wouldn't have participated with a program to build the bomb, but nonetheless, very interesting. Lynn, is there anything further you want to say? Lynn Feinerman, and then we'll go to Wendy. And Seth and Carl, thank you for saying to my listeners at the Green Power Wellness Show on PRN. Thank you for being with us. We're going to continue this for a while. You're going to get cut off. If you want to see more, we will go for another hour or more. Go to grassrootsep.org, GRASSROOTSEP, as in electionprotection.org, and get the link for the rest of this, because we're going to say goodbye to you for now. And thank you for being with us so far. Seth, Carl.
Lynn is now unmuted.
Lynn, did you want to add something before we go to Wendy?
Yeah, I just, I wanted to thank Greg for clarifying and also say that from what he said, I would never even want to bother seeing this movie. What is the point of seeing it except to, I mean, it's just a shallow representation of what was really happening. And it's a travesty not to help people to understand that these people were intoxicated. Harry Truman was intoxicated with the idea of blowing up people in phantasmagorical manners. And there have been a lot of them. The latest is Robert Kagan, who talks about how it wouldn't be so bad, you know, if we dropped a bunch of bombs and had people, you know, have radiation sickness. It's an insanity, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I will also point out, by the way, that Donald Trump did not acknowledge the first strike policy. He made it clear that he did not believe that the US should refrain from using nuclear weapons first, as I recall. I mean, Seth, can you confirm that, you guys? I mean, I remember Trump saying that.
Well, every president has embraced our first strike policy,
But he
unfortunately.
Trump did not buy into the first strike policy, as I recall.
I'm sure about that. We've had a lot of revelations lately about how he really seriously considered it against Korea. You know, so yeah. I'm not sure. Now, you know, Obama tried to move the ball forward a bit towards no first use, but we haven't heard much about it lately. I know Obama, I think, at least paid lip service to maybe going to no first use.
Yeah, I don't credit Trump for moving the ball towards no first use in the slightest. Okay. Not that that's a goal anyway, in my opinion. Actually, I should, as a side note.
Well, I've heard that Ron DeSantis is considering a first strike against Key West, but you know, that's another. Okay, Wendy Lederman, go ahead, Wendy. By the way, we're getting to the top of the hour. If you guys have to leave for lobby, if you can wait through, I do have people with their hands up, and then we'll start with our Greenpeace campaign in the second hour. But this is obviously a great discussion. Wendy, go ahead, please.
Thank you. And just on your last note, Harvey, just being in Florida, I can say that DeSantis's first strike, I think, is against his own constituents. So it's not really going very well for him here. But Carl mentioned something before that we discuss a lot on the show, and that's the really kind of hidden but like inescapable link between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. And if anyone has kind of done the masochistic task of looking through the NDAA of this year, it's gotten a lot, like so many new nuclear programs, and even calling for like minimal amounts of uranium to be supplied from the DOE to the DOJ, and the line is just getting erased between the two agencies. And then we see all this investment in nuclear power when really like the return on that investment is just infinitesimal. It's, I mean, I think Florida, we get 3% of our power. California, you guys get 9% of your power from nuclear. And so it really makes no sense. But then when you start seeing how much is going to go into the Department of Defense, it starts to make sense. And the one thing I realized, you know, reading through the non-proliferation treaties that are wonderful, that I so appreciate your work on that. It's phenomenal. But in those treaties, and obviously like not to your work, but for what it is, it kind of treats nuclear energy as like a fundamental right to all people. And it, to me, that just, it's like, I don't see how we're going to get to a place of eradicating the weapons when we're putting so much money into the nuclear power industry, when essentially it's there to fuel the weapons. So if you could comment on that, Seth, and thank you so much for your work and for being with us, and Greg as well. Thank you. All you guys.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Good points. Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, do I only have the minute? I can, the short answer is that ICANN is a single issue organization, and that's the only way we were able to build such a large coalition, because it's such a vast range of NGOs in so many countries, and some of them are not anti-nuclear energy. So we have had to adopt a neutral position, and the treaty, it's not like we wrote the treaty. Many of our partners did advocate around this issue, but you're right that the treaty repeats, the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, repeats the phrase from the NPT, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, when it comes to nuclear energy, and says that there's an inalienable right to pursue nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. But you are correct. In my opinion, these issues are very connected. I mean, if you look at the United States, nuclear weapons are not the purview of the Department of Defense. They're in the Department of Energy. It is very connected. And this is, it's very difficult to unravel these. But the only way, we were able to advance after 70 plus years of most of the world all agreeing that we should get rid of nuclear weapons, was to really be narrow in the way we framed it, and treat the issue that people generally agree on. And because that's really what was the hiccup for so many decades, was that people were couldn't get everything they wanted in these things. So we just went for the one issue that we felt that we could get most of the world to agree on, and we're trying to move the needle on that first.
Right, and based on a number of discussions we've had on these calls, the line, in the beginning, the AEC made a huge deal of saying nuclear weapons and nuclear power are entirely separate, and now they're not saying that anymore. I mean, the AEC is not around, but the nuclear industry is actually using its usefulness in making nuclear weapons as a selling point, which was completely verboten in the early days of nuclear power. Carl Grossman, you want to comment on that? And then Greg?
Yeah, I was on a,
I have to interrupt just because my computer's about to shut down. I have to get the battery. I have to get a battery. So I'm going to leave your picture for a minute.
Like at Fukushima, you're going to get a battery out of your car. Seth, I know you may be looking at a clock. If you need to go, let us know. But it's really been great to have you with us. We appreciate it. And then when you come back, you don't have to wear a tie. So, but we'll be glad to have you back anytime. Carl Grossman, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that for 20 years, I was on a commission sponsored by the UN Department of Disarmament Affairs and the International Association of University Presidents. And my pitch was the United Nations has designated, I think it's 7 areas around the world as nuclear-free zones. And I took the position, and banning nuclear weapons. I took the position that the entire planet should be a nuclear-free zone, no nuclear weapons, no nuclear power plants. And I made a number of presentations to the commission and elsewhere about how Pakistan got the bomb and how any country with a nuclear reactor would have the materiel and the trained personnel to produce nuclear weapons.
And that's proved to be the case. I mean, that's how obviously both India and Pakistan got their bombs. Would you say that's accurate, Seth?
Well, I was going to say that, Carl, your vision is very much the way I think the treaty came about, because basically we got a lot of the countries in the nuclear weapons free zones to also say that it's not enough to have a zone that says, where we all agree that we won't pursue or use nuclear weapons, when a conflict far outside of our region could still cause harm to us. And so that was sort of the underlying logic of the theory of the treaty, was that these countries needed to motivate a global treaty that sort of stitched together the nuclear weapons free zones and provides, a mechanism for countries that are stuck in these zones, in these regions like Europe and South Asia and East Asia, for example, that can't have nuclear weapons free zones at the moment, to sort of advocate for one for themselves, because they would like one. This is Europe's first nuclear weapons free zone, let's say, with the TPNW. So
good. Greg, did you get your?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm here.
You want to jump in on that?
No, I think I'll move. I think they've said it all. Maybe go to the next
Very
question.
good. We're gonna give this a few more times, minutes, then we're gonna go to talk with Greenpeace, one of the great anti-nuclear organizations, of course, but Falabi is gonna talk to us today about their democracy campaign. Let's go to Mary Stonewall and then Ruth Strauss, since we had an overload of testosterone here. Mary, go ahead, and then Ruth. Mary, go ahead.
All right, I just want to bring up a couple points real quick. One thing nobody's even realizing is, this movie, what it says, whatever, people don't realize that all the nuclear material that was created at Hanford here in Washington State, which has now been cataloged as possibly the most polluted with nuclear waste in the world. And twice now we've had two different fires, 2015, 2017, where the grasslands at Hanford burnt right to the ground. So much so that it compromised the concrete structures that hold the nuclear waste. And we had a cave-in between those years. We had a cave-in, and they made all the workers leave the Hanford, and they brought in crews that nobody knew who they were. And then they told the workers they could come back to work and everything was fine. Well, 90% of those original engineers have all since left the Northwest.
Okay.
Secondly, I want to point out real quick, that it's MAD, which is the mutually assured destruction that has created this nuclear power baloney that we're talking about. And when it comes to what nuclear is, we should do a documentary more and call it Progress Through Suicide, because, I've done all kinds of research, and more scientists than not that were part of this bomb that went off over in Japan committed suicide after they saw what happened. Pilots committed suicide after they saw what happened. And the citizens having to live with what they had to live with afterwards committed suicide. So this progress in nuclear, which people don't even bring up the fact that they named it new cleaner. So it'd be, it's cleaner energy. So we'll put it nuclear. All right. So they were, tricking the mind of the humans.
Right.
We need to change its name, number one, I think. It's radioactive. It's not new cleaner.
No, it's not.
But I want to bring up the suicide side of it. And it would be neat if we could work on a documentary somewhere along the way with someone and show that from the very root of this project, people who committed suicide, the scientists, the pilots, and the people.
Well, that certainly could have been raised in a film like Oppenheimer. There's no doubt about that. I want to point out very quickly that we have on the call with us Kat Kramer, whose father, Stanley Kramer, made one of the great anti-war films, On the Beach. I don't know, way too before everybody's time on this, but a magnificent piece. And Kat Kramer is with us, so very, very cool on that. Ruth Strauss, and then I want to go to Dennis Bernstein real quick, and Dave Saltman. Go ahead, Ruth, please. And we are getting a little over time, but it's a great dialogue, so let's keep doing it, and then we'll get to Falabi from Greenpeace. Ruth Strauss, please, go ahead. And
well, this is real quick. Although everybody else here, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so there is, as a character study of Oppenheimer with archival footage, MSNBC has done a documentary, and it's not fictionalized. I would say that it's a good portrait of him, but it's not, certainly doesn't take an anti-nuclear stance or whatever. It's just archival footage of what went on. PFK, Roy of Hollywood, every year on I think it's August 5th or whenever the first bomb was dropped, has done a reading, and I think it's 12 hours long, 6 hours on one night, 6 hours on another, called The Last Train from Hiroshima. And it is absolutely chilling, but it is a description of what happened to people, and it's very, very well done.
What's
And
it
the last,
Put the
Pardon?
title in the chat. What's it called?
the last train from Hiroshima. Now, I am going to write Michael Novick to make sure that he does not, axe that, because that was something that Roy did every year, and it took 2 nights to do it. And anybody who here is too young to have seen The Day After, that's a really important thing. It was many years ago, but ahead of its time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kat Kramer has pointed out that her father's film On the Beach was the first film to deal with the nuclear weapons issue. And Greg, I know you're writing a lot in the film world. You may want to go back and look at On the Beach. Pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, I'm very, very well. I saw it as a young man and several times since. It's a
You watched it for the
terrific movie.
You probably, as a young man, you watched it for the scene of Burt Lancaster making out on the beach. What was it, Ava Gardner?
I think that was, what was that, or is that From Here to Eternity? I don't know. Maybe Burt did it in several movies, but
well, it would be remiss of me, since we brought up the issue of sex, that this is the only film I've ever seen depicting a naked couple having sex in a congressional committee hearing. That moment in Oppenheimer was absolutely shocking, even to me. I mean, I was amazed.
well, we see him reading or saying the "I am become death," one of his most famous quotes, in the middle of a nude sex scene. Also, he reads it out of a book during a nude sex scene. So
yeah,
I am become death, destroyer of worlds.
And that Sanskrit stuff was not in Playboy. Dave Saltman, please go. Oh, there you go. Oh, there's On the Beach, 1950. Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner, but you're right, they were not making out on the beach, but nonetheless, Gregory Peck was a hell of a guy, by the way. Really worth mentioning. Okay, Dave Saltman, please. Thank you for that, Steve.
More about the security clearance issue that Mr. Sheldon brought up. My father was a research chemist, and he knew Oppenheimer was a big topic in our house in 1954 when I was 8 years old. And one of the reasons for that, or the main reason for that, I guess, is that many scientists back in those days worked in decommissioned World War II military facilities. My father, for example, worked he wasn't doing defense work, but he needed a top secret clearance because his laboratory was on the grounds of the Rocky Mountain Arsenal in Denver. That's where I grew up. And so he's working for, he's just being an industrial chemist. That was his profession. If you ever rode on a Goodyear tire, my father invented that rubber. So we all have a connection with him. He was a great guy. Died at 102. Anyway, my point is this. My mother was a member of an organization which many of you probably know, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. It's now a UN NGO. And many of the wives, or many of the members of that organization, were wives of members of a union called the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers, which was one of the main targets of the McCarthy Committee. And so the McCarthy Committee came after that union, and guilt by association, they got to my mother, and they had a hearing about my father's security clearance. And the chief witness at the hearing was the babysitter. And the babysitter testified that in the house where I grew up, there were books about Russia. And what in God's name was a scientist doing with books about Russia in his house if he wasn't a communist sympathizer? And I'm not making this up. They took away my father's security clearance and he lost his job. He could not get onto the grounds to do his job. And we were plunged into poverty for the next 2 years. My father, who had a PhD in chemistry from the University of Chicago, was doing manual labor, and my mother was giving piano lessons. And I was only 8. Wasn't much I could do. I was vaguely aware that this was going on. But the security clearance thing, I don't know that it applied exactly like this to Oppenheimer, but it was a dangerous weapon in 1954 in the hands of the McCarthy Committee. And I should also add that, to my knowledge, most of these scientists who were removed from action because of this were Jews.
Yes, and the role of women, that was one thing about the movie. I don't know if you saw it, Dave. My favorite character in the movie by far was Kitty Oppenheimer. I thought she was really powerful and very, very well played and effective. I loved what she did throughout the movie. I'm sure your mother, Dave, was would have loved to seen her in this movie. Their roles sound very parallel. Seth, did you want to say something? Then we'll go to Dennis Bernstein. We're going way over time. I'm sorry, but it's a very good discussion. And we will we'll reprise this in a couple of weeks. Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, I don't want to stop others from commenting too, but I feel like I should try to respond just to say that, well, first of all, WILP is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom is one of our core partners for ICANN. So we've done most of our work with and through them. And my grandfather was also blacklisted during McCarthy era, and he didn't have security. It wasn't about his security clearance. He was a playwright, but that's totally different. But it's just by way of saying that I do recognize that this was a terrible episode in American history and the story that needs to be told time and again to avoid us falling down that same, historical cycle once again. My comment was more about the implications of making that the core narrative for the movie about the man who invented the most destructive force in humanity.
Yes, very well stated. Dennis Bernstein is a radio talk host, Seth. He has a fabulous show out of Berkeley on KPFA, Flashpoints, which is nationally syndicated. Greg, I'm sure you know Dennis as well, and Carl. Dennis, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Harv?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little been under the COVID sword. Just wanted to sign in a little bit. My partner is Japanese, and this movie isn't playing all that well based on what I know so far within the Japanese and Japanese American community. But I several years ago had an opportunity to produce a play, a book-length play called The Road to Hiroshima. And it based on Black Rain, and had a chance to immerse in what happened on the ground. It was an extraordinary work because it sort of, the creation, it came through the eyes of a night watchman who was a poet, but during the war became a night watchman and observed what happened after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And it's the testimony based on Black women, the survivor testimony was extraordinary, and what happened to the human soul and the shredding of life. And at one point in the play, and it's available nationally, one point in the play, the night watchman comes upon a bridge and he sees it's the bridge out of Hiroshima, but everybody is turning away from the bridge and fleeing back into the flames because they're afraid to cross the bridge, because on the bridge, there was a little baby sucking at the breast of a corpse. And the extraordinary suffering that was created that still exists to this day, and the implications and the suffering still from survivors and relatives of survivors and children and great-grandchildren is extraordinary. And I think the human suffering and the shredding of humanity on the ground is incredibly important to consider when we're thinking about this. And like I say, that part of the story, I've done every aspect of reporting on this story, interviewed just about every downwinder on the death mile from Hanford. and heard the extraordinary suffering that happened on all sides of the bomb, went with the downwinders to the United Nations to meet the survivors of the bomb. And the human toll really needs a lot more expression. That's all I'm going to say now. But as I say, it's not playing as well in the Japanese and Japanese American community.
Well, I was shocked when he made when Oppenheimer, and maybe he actually said this, that the Japanese aren't all that happy about it or whatever he said. It was really a shockingly brutal statement he made very briefly in the movie, which seemed very out of character of the rest of the movie. I was amazed by that. Sorry, go ahead. Okay, Dennis, you're muted here. So what we're going to do, Seth, Carl, Greg, thank you so much for staying with us. We had Falabi scheduled at the top of the hour. I do want to go to him to talk about the Greenpeace campaign on democracy. And then we have Common Cause representative and Joel Siegel. I want to give you each a minute. We are definitely going to come back to this in 2 or 3 weeks. And because obviously it's a bottomless wellspring here to talk about. If Tatanka and Justin and Jeffrey, if you can each take 1 minute, that would be really great. I know it won't do you justice, but we got to move on, and we will come back. Tatanka, go ahead, please.
Okay. Wendy brought up the discussion, which has been my mantra ever since I've been on this program, about there would be no nuclear power without nuclear weapons. And as we think about it, the line is so blurred, we should consider our marketing to consider sort of a larger term, and that nuclear weapons and nuclear power are both deadly. And they're both weapons against the environment and against humans. Probably the only odds you could get in Vegas is if you wanted to bet and you could get somebody is, will I be harmed or killed by nuclear weapons or nuclear power first? That's all I have to say.
It's good enough. And again, Seth, I'm going to lobby you to please find a way to get the UN to deal with Zaporizhzhia. I'm way more terrified of the instability at Zaporizhzhia than I am of the likelihood of a nuclear war. Having been in Kiev after Chernobyl, in central Pennsylvania after 3 Mile Island, having marched against Fukushima, we'll revisit that in 2 or 3 weeks, and maybe we can persuade you to come back on. Justin, and then Jeffrey, and then we're going to move on. 1 minute, please, each.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to your point, Harvey, about obstructionism, basically sabotage of the German nuclear program. That's a very valid political strategy. In fact, one side of the American aisle seems to be doing it pretty regularly in terms of scientific and other progress. But in the case of what happened with the nuclear programs after America decided to push forward anyway, instead of stopping Germany, is that the Soviets then got information from the Americans. And so I put in here in the chat, after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the program accelerated into high gear. They began construction of a near copy of the Fat Man bomb using detailed design descriptions provided by a man named Fuchs. This replica, named Joe 1 by the West, was detonated at the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan on August 29th, 1949, just 4 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right, and there was that moment when Harry Truman laughs at the idea that the Soviets could ever get a bomb. It was ridiculous. Thank you for that, Justin. Jeffrey, 1 minute, please, and then we're going to move on.
All right, all right,
1 minute, please.
Timer on. So now I'm going to try and be quick and speed through.
Yes.
I could trust Chris Nolan because he's one of the 10 directors who has never made a bad movie with this project. But I'm just disappointed that they didn't show the Oppenheimer film won't show how MIC sacrificed Hispanics for atomic bomb tests. They should have put that in the film. Also, even though Dr. Nancy said I wasn't paying attention, I was paying attention because throughout the whole thing, you never mentioned anything about Japan having its own atomic bomb project. and
They
that
did.
North Korea has it.
They didn't. The Japanese idea of attacking the United States, and I couldn't make this up, they had ceramic bombs which were filled with insects to carry the plague, and they sent them to drop them on America. That was the extent of the Japanese nuclear plant program that I'm aware of. They had no attempt to build a nuclear weapon of any significance whatsoever. And again, I want to nominate, in retrospect, Werner Heisenberg for as many Nobel Prizes as we possibly can, because I've been led to believe that he sabotaged their program. And the idea that Mo Berg decided not to kill him was a confirmation of that. You guys want to comment on that? And we got to move on. It's been great having you, Seth. Absolutely terrific. Greg Mitchell, wherever you are, thank you, and of course Carl Grossman. Seth, do you want to have a last word before we move on?
Well, I am actually about to go, I have to go speak at a panel on a film festival talking about movies and nuclear weapons right now. But it seems like, especially, Mary was talking about other films that we should be watching and making this issue. And so, I mean, that's what this particular festival is about. It's like Bob Richter's film In Our Hands about the 1982 Central Park protest, which was instrumental in leading to the nuclear freeze in the 1980s. And it's a movie about In Our Hands, called In Our Hands, about Setsuko Thurlow, and that sort of follows a bit on, I think, Dennis's point, which I think we should be telling those stories all the time. And this movie is about Setsuko Thurlow, who is one of ICANN's main spokespeople, and speaks about her experience as a 13-year-old girl in Hiroshima when the bomb was, when the US detonated the bomb. And there's also another movie called On the Morning You Wake that is a VR experience about the false test in Hawaii 2 years ago, and people's experience in Hawaii when they saw that there was an incoming missile from North Korea, and then turned out to be false. So, there are other stories being told and that need to be told. And I do think that those need to be centered. That's part of the work that we all can do, I think, and sort of never to let, and I think it goes to what a bunch of you have said, never to let a story be told about nuclear weapons without sort of pushing back and saying that, and examining the human consequence, both from the use, of course, the dropping the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but the testing, the over 2,000 tests I've referenced, and then other things along the production line. And yes, that extends to Hanford, as Mary had pointed out. It's difficult to give due recognition of all the regions that were affected.
Yes, and you can go into your great to have you. You can go.
But we should try.
You can go into your panel now and tell them that you were just on a discussion with Kat Kramer, the daughter of Stanley Kramer, who made the great film On the Beach, which is really the first big Hollywood excursion into nuclear war. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You've been wonderful. Thank you, Carlo. Great. Greg Mitchell. Great. We are going to proceed now. We still have 66 people with us, and we're going to go now to our promised discussion with Falabi from Greenpeace. Falabi, you want to say hi? And Greenpeace, of course, one of the great seminal or origin organizations against nuclear power and weapons. Falabi, are you with us? Where are you?
Hi, I'm here.
There you are. Okay. And then we're going to have Suzanne from Common Cause talk to us about various electoral issues. And then Joel Siegel is going to join us to talk about homelessness and Medicare for all. Go ahead, Falabi, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Really great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. A very, very important and timely conversation that we just had here. I'm the Democracy Campaign Director for Greenpeace. Greenpeace is a group of organizations that bear witness to environmental abuse using scientific reports, creative communication, and of course, non-violent direct action. To connect to the convention that just happened here, we have taken a very firm stance against nuclear weapon testing. And I think many of you who are on this call will know about our protest of the French nuclear weapon testing that led to the sinking of our iconic ship, the Rainbow Warriors, in 1985, with the death of one of the crew members on that ship. But I'm here today to actually invite you all to a virtual town hall that we are going to be organizing tomorrow around protesting our rights to protest and dissent. I'm going to put the link here so that you all can have the link while I'm talking. For more than 8 years now, Greenpeace has been we've been defending ourselves from a very bogus legal strategy that has been designed by mostly fossil fuel companies to shut organizations like Greenpeace up and to shut us down as an organization from doing our work. Earlier this year, we won this lawsuit. This tactic is called strategic lawsuit against public participation, and it's not a real lawsuit. It's the whole intent of this is to really shut organizations like us up in court. They don't feel like they can win. The whole idea is to really tie organizations like Greenpeace up in court, force us to use a lot of our resources and defending ourselves, and not have enough time to really to work on our mission. And so earlier this year, we won one of those two SLAP lawsuits. This one was brought by Resolute Forest Products, I think one of the Canada's largest logging company. They sued Greenpeace for $100 million for a report that we did on that company. Resolute has appealed, even though they stand no chance of winning the appeal. But that is the whole point of SLAPs. It's not about winning. It's about tying us up and tying up our resources up. But there's a more ominous SLAP lawsuit that Greenpeace is facing. In about a year from now, we will be in a North Dakota court defending ourselves against the support that Greenpeace gave to Standing Rock during the protest against the Dakota Access Pipeline in 2016. Energy Transfer Partner alleged that Greenpeace is responsible for everything that happened at DAPO, that we must have known that our support for this protest will result in destruction of property, and they are basically suing us for defamation and for anything that happened there. Besides the fact that Greenpeace was only there in a very supportive role. As many of you here know, the Standing Rock was led by indigenous leaders, indigenous communities. And saying that in and of itself is an insult to the indigenous leaders who led the movement. So we are having this this town hall tomorrow to draw attention to this kind of bogus lawsuits. And we are inviting all of you to be there. It's going to be a great event. Representative Jamie Raskin is going to be speaking. He's the one who has introduced the Federal SLAP Protection Act. And there's an opportunity this year to actually introduce it in a bipartisan manner in the Congress. Other speakers will include Esther Calhoun, who is a leader from Uniontown, Alabama, who has been defending herself against companies that put coal ash in her neighborhood. And she's going to be there to tell her stories. There are other speakers there. I'm not going to go through that. But it's just very important to understand that this case is very existential to Greenpeace. We could actually lose this case. Energy Transfer Partner is suing us for $300 million. You can just imagine that. And it is not just an effort to kind of chill Greenpeace and take us off the map from working as an organization. is actually about the movement. What these companies are doing is to let people know that if you're an individual or any organization that raise up your voices against their climate destroying practices, you will get it like Greenpeace. And it's also meant to kind of make Greenpeace, toxify Greenpeace among other organizations, because they are also suing some organizations that actually are connected to us. So this is important for everybody. It's a like we said, this is not just existential to Greenpeace, it's existential to our progressive causes, it's existential to our ability to do any social justice organizing in this country. And we are seeing a lot of trend in that. You've seen things happen in Atlanta, around Cop City, where environmental activists has been deemed domestic terrorists. And even groups that are meant to even defend, provide bail funding for the protesters, the government is coming after them. So we are seeing this, and it's a very alarming trend. And I hope as many of you as possible could join us tomorrow to be part of this movement that says we will refuse to be silenced. We will not be silenced. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Falabi. Very, very important. And please again put the link to the chat to tomorrow's event in there. And as a voting member of Greenpeace, I became senior advisor to Greenpeace in 1991, but now I'm too senior even for that. I love Greenpeace, and certainly the threat of the slap suit to Greenpeace is a threat that way goes beyond Greenpeace. I mean, this is a very, very big deal, and we need to win this. So thank you very, very much. Does anybody want to ask anything of Falabi before we move on? You've been with Greenpeace for a while, Falabi. It's really good to have you with us. Jeffrey, go ahead. Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, I did have this idea. It's kind of crazy for Greenpeace to do. I was thinking maybe you guys should infiltrate those oil companies, like send someone over into the company and either have the rise to the ranks and become the head of the company, or become the intelligence person and gather information that you can use against the company about the bad stuff they're doing. It's just an idea of mine. Oh, and Harvey, you cut me off before I could finish the one last thing I wanted to tell you. I was planning to do pitch an idea for an international co-production of a feature film on the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the United States and Japan.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That's a good idea, Jeffrey. We appreciate it. And just for the record, my understanding is that Japan never got anywhere even remotely close to building a nuclear bomb. It was not even a minor priority. There may have been a few people in Japan vaguely interested, but that was not what they were interested in. And I will say that their idea of a mass attack on the United States was to have ceramic containers filled with insects that carried the plague, and to drop them on American cities. That was the extent of the Japanese nuclear program that I am aware of. But thank you for bringing it up, Jeffrey. We appreciate that. Falabi, is there anything else you want to discuss with us before we move on?
Yeah, maybe I can. Yes, I think I see Mary's hand. Maybe if I see that, maybe I can take both questions together.
Okay, Mary, go ahead. Do you have a question for Falabi, please? And then we're going to talk with Suzanne from Common Cause. Great to have you with us, Suzanne. Go ahead, Mary.
Yes, I've been working with people all throughout Africa in regards to this matter. And I'm really surprised how the naked women have been able to make a lot of changes in that regards. There's the naked women marches throughout Africa that have been happening to stem big oil and get the retribution that their communities deserve for the pollution and the contamination of their water. But I would love to ask you if you'd be interested in hooking up with me on what you're trying to accomplish, because I feel that two brilliant minds, maybe we can come together and make some solutions. Because the big thing is we can't continue to point fingers. We got to find solutions. And
Okay.
if people had listened to me back in the 80s, I said to everybody, you can go to all the marches you want. Every march that you do, every protest that you do is feeding their system, because you got to buy all your supplies. You got to get the petrol to go there. You buy the Coca-Cola and the coolers and the signs and everything. Nobody's profiting from that but the elitists. Plus, you got to get them permission slips. And now, once you're seen, you cannot hide. But if they had done what I said in the 80s, real quick, like if we had started a citizens investment group where we start investing heavily in the companies we want shut down, then we could slowly get the controlling assets of said company, fire the CEOs, and rebuild that company or retool it to be a more sustainable company and use its profiting for good and not for evil. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Very, very well spoken. For Lobby, do you want to?
Yeah, just quickly, thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Mary, for those questions. Yes, Mary, you are right. This bogus shut them up legal tactics in the court is a global phenomenon. It's happening all over the world. It's happening a lot in Africa. So I will be happy to talk to you more about that. So you also know our Greenpeace French was also recently sued by Total, and we are still fighting that cause. And just remember, the reason why we are seeing these tactics is because we are winning. The companies know that our voices are important. Otherwise, they will not be going to this extent to try to shut us up and shut us down. And the antidote to that is not to be frightened, it's not to be afraid, it's not to self-censor. The antidote to it is to speak out louder, to be bolder, and to really show them that we are not going to kowtow to their bogus legal tactics. That is what we intend to do rather than infiltrating any company or doing any of those things. We are going to just be bolder and speak out louder than ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Flavie. Much appreciated. I want to go now to Suzanne and put the links in the chat, and you have an event tomorrow. Make sure everybody knows about that. Suzanne, you have been patiently waiting for more than a couple of weeks. You're with Common Cause, and you got a lot to say about the Moore Amendment and also about the amazing contests over the districts in Alabama and Ohio. So let's hear it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and speak with you all. I have a PowerPoint because that's how I organize my thoughts.
Please do. Go ahead.
Give me just a second to make it start. So as I'm getting this set up, my name is Suzanne Almeida. My title at Common Cause, I'm one of the directors of state operations. But in a prior life at Common Cause, I was a member of the redistricting team and led some of the work around Moore v. Harper. So today we're going to talk a lot about Moore v. Harper. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening elsewhere in the world of redistricting, with the caveat that things are changing very quickly. And that there may be things that I don't know have happened yet. Litigation is ongoing, legislation is ongoing. So if I get something wrong, I'm just asking y'all for a little bit of grace as we move forward.
Please.
Absolutely. So let's dig in. Moore v. Harper comes out of a case in North Carolina that Common Cause, amongst other plaintiffs, was a part of, where we sued over gerrymandered state and federal maps. And we were really fortunate in that we presented a good case, and the North Carolina Supreme Court agreed with us and said two things. One, these maps are gerrymandered, and two, partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional under the state constitution. As part of what happens after you get a ruling like that, the maps go back to the state legislature. They try again. In this case, they failed. And the maps went back up to the Supreme Court of North Carolina, who looked at the map, said, this is not good enough, and told a panel of judges, or not panel judges, a panel of what are called special masters, who are folks with technical expertise who could help draw maps, to redraw the maps. And then the Supreme Court accepted that final map for congressional districts. That set off a whole series of events, including a Supreme Court case, which luckily, I'm going to spoil the ending for y'all, came out perfectly. It came out exactly what we wanted to do. But what the Republicans brought up to the Supreme Court from North Carolina was this theory called the independent state legislature theory. And I'm very careful to say theory, not doctrine, because it is fake. It is not based in precedent. It is not based in anything other than a misinterpretation of the words legislature in the Constitution. So essentially, their argument is that because the power to draw or to control congressional elections is vested in state legislatures, that meant state legislatures could do all of the things from start to finish with no oversight from the courts. What we saw in Moore v. Harper is that was rejected really soundly. So here's the timeline of the case. I'm not going to walk through all of the highlights. It's worth noting that in April of this year, before we got the Moore v. Harper ruling from the Supreme Court of North Carolina flipped because of an election last November, and the defendants relitigated these issues in front of the Supreme Court, and that Supreme Court said, or the current Supreme Court said, nope, this is actually not a problem. This map would have been fine. And so that, undermined kind of the basis for Moore v. Harper. That being said, that was all briefed to the Supreme Court of the United States. Common Cause was the only one of the plaintiffs that said, we think this should move forward. We think we've had oral argument already. We think we understand the issues. And quite frankly, from a strategic perspective, we think this is the right case to decide these issues. Turns out, luckily, we were right, and the Supreme Court decided in our favor. I'm just going to come out and say it. It was a pretty universal victory, right? We had created internally and to share with some partners what we called a pain chart, like those things you get from the doctor that go from the green smiley face to the red, very angry, very much in pain face. We are solidly in the green. So the Supreme Court said independent state legislature theory does not apply here. There is no basis for it. And they say that in a couple of ways. They talk about the precedent, the history of it, and then they make some very clear legal holdings that make it very clear. ISLT is not a thing. It cannot be used in this way. So these are some of the pull quotes. My personal favorite is this last one. It says, were there any doubt, historical practice confirms that state legislatures remain bound by state constitutional restraints when exercising authority under the Elections Clause, which is a really legalese way to say, this is how it's always been. We're not going to change the rules just because you asked us to at the last minute. So what you need to know, it's an outright victory, right? There is no caveats here. There's no outright victory, but it both rejected kind of the arguments put forth by the North Carolina legislators and adopted the pro-democracy position in full. So we are getting the full cake in this particular decision. Importantly, the court reaffirmed the fundamental role of state constitutions and state courts. And that's really what was at stake in this case, right? Had this case gone a different way, what we could have seen is kind of an undermining of the pillars of our democracy, right? Where state courts interpret the laws of interpret the laws made by state legislatures in light of state constitutions. That didn't happen. Instead, the Supreme Court upheld that balance of power. So the court does some other good things, right? They also reaffirm the regular judicial review, right? The motions and papers filed by the North Carolina legislators called that into question, right? This argument was, can state courts even weigh in here? The answer, according to the Supreme Court of the United States, is yes. It reaffirms the right of people to pass referendums around maps and mapping processes. It reaffirms the governor's veto. And it finally reaffirms the right of people to use initiative power to create independent redistricting commissions or other redistricting processes that are not just through the legislature. I'm not going to read these. These are some of the luminaries on our team who we're very fortunate to work with, including Kathy Fung, who is the Common Cause Vice President of Programs, Bob Phillips, who's our Executive Director in North Carolina, Hillary Klein, who was one of our senior attorneys with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. And then, of course, last but not least, Neil Katyal, former Solicitor General of the United States, who we were fortunate enough to have argue the case in front of the Supreme Court. I was really fortunate to be in the room when he argued, and also to be able to watch some of his practice rounds. And for anyone who has any doubt, Neil is brilliant, and it is a real pleasure to watch him work and to watch him think. So what are the impacts on states? Because we get the decision, what happens next? So first of all, the status quo can continue. State courts can continue to exercise judicial review of redistricting and election laws. State courts remain the appropriate bodies to determine what is constitutional under state law, and are a viable alternative for judicial review of even state laws that govern federal elections. And then third, the United States Supreme Court will step in only if a state court exceeds the quote ordinary exercise of judicial review. Now, we don't know exactly what that means, but that is language that does not raise any alarm bells, right? That is language that makes sense when you're thinking about what the role of the United States Supreme Court is vis-a-vis the role of a state court. But we're not done. We still need protections. Winning Moore v. Harper did not fix all of the problems of our democracy, as I'm sure you all are very well aware. So there's some federal legislation that we are working to get passed. So the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would require states and jurisdictions with a history of discriminatory voting practices to be pre-cleared, right, and to get approval from the federal government in order to implement certain voting practices. The Freedom to Vote Act, which was just introduced last week. Today is just Monday. It was last week. That would set basic national standards for voting and would place a ban on partisan gerrymandering nationwide for congressional elections only. And then in the states, and this is really where our work at Common Cause, your work as advocates, really comes kind of the rubber hits the road, right? We're looking at codifying judicial review, something we didn't think we needed to do, but now there's work in legislatures to make sure that happens. Banning partisan gerrymandering, implementing independent redistricting commissions, looking at states where if you can't implement an independent redistricting commission, what are the reforms that you can make to make redistricting, voting elections more participatory and more representative? So by special request, I know that there are many of you who are interested in what's happening in a number of states. These are a handful. There is still redistricting litigation happening across the country, including states like Georgia, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, that are not listed here because they are in the midst of litigation. And so it's mostly motions practice and trying to kind of get to a place of trial. But these are three that I think are worth highlighting. So first, in Ohio, it's worth noting that the Ohio Redistricting Commission in 2021 failed to come up with constitutional maps either for federal or state court. So they ended up holding elections on unconstitutional maps. There was litigation filed, and that litigation included a version of the independent state legislature theory, and that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, who granted cert, which means that they agreed to take the case. After the Moore v. Harper decision came down, the case was remanded back to the lower court. So that is still in litigation. They're going to do more briefing, more argument, understand kind of what the impact is moving forward. There's also kind of just a really practical decision making that is the Republicans who lead the state and who lead the redistricting process in that state are trying to make, which is whether they draw new lines, try again, go back to the drawing board, or if they ask the Ohio Supreme Court, which, by the way, has also flipped in partisan balance. So the Republicans are now in charge to accept one of the existing maps that has been previously ruled unconstitutional. In New York, the State Court of Appeals, again last week, it was a busy week, maybe 2 weeks ago, found that the map drawn by the special master was for one cycle only, and so required that the redistricting commission redraw the map. There are all sorts of questions about what that process will look like. There are questions about whether or not that redistricting commission can do the job that it's set up to do, because it is a 1-to-1 partisan balance between Democrats and Republicans. But that is where that process is. And then in Alabama, which was the other big, or one of the other big blockbuster democracy decisions out of the Supreme Court this year, a case called Milligan, which was about whether or not essentially the Voting Rights Act still applied in the way that we thought it did. And that whether the Voting Rights Act said, as voting rights advocates like myself, like others who are much smarter than me have been arguing, that based on Alabama's demographics, the congressional map should have at least 2 majority Black districts rather than just the one that had been racially gerrymandered by the Alabama legislature. The Supreme Court in the Milligan decision agreed, and it was kind of a surprise to everyone, and we were very happy about it, and said, we think, everything you already know about the Voting Rights Act, the way you analyze factors for the Voting Rights Act has not changed. We are relying on precedent here. And that precedent tells us that the Alabama legislature should have drawn a map that has 2 majority Black districts, or quote, something close to it. Surprising possibly no one, although those of us who are optimists at heart were really hoping it would go a different way. The Alabama legislature on Friday, so this is fresh news-ish, passed a new map that does not include a second majority Black district. It just includes the one, plus they have adjusted some thresholds. The map will now go back to the federal court, who heard the case initially, who will analyze it. Friends of ours, including folks like the National Redistricting Foundation, have committed to sue or to continue litigation until this map is fair. But the fight continues. And I think that is the story that kind of I want to leave you with before I pause for questions, which is Moore v. Harper ended up a victory, and we are over the moon at Common Cause and other places in the democracy space about how the Supreme Court understood the arguments about precedent and understood the arguments about balance of power, and really outlined those in its opinion. And the fight is not over, right? Not only are we still fighting on redistricting, we're still fighting on voting rights. And even in places where things are going relatively well, there's always more work to be done. So I am so incredibly thankful for groups like you all who are willing to spend, hours on a Monday evening thinking about these things, in addition to whatever you do during your day job, because the work doesn't happen without folks like you. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And I'm sure there are questions.
Well, that was a great presentation. We're going to go over the top of the hour. I want to keep doing this. I don't know if Joel Siegel is on the line. He was scheduled to speak at this point, but I don't see him here. And I'm sure he can join us next week. Joel, if you're somewhere here. That was really very, very enlightening. I will, since I can never resist a good story, Suzanne. The Supreme Court of Ohio actually did not flip. It was controlled by Republicans.
I said it, and I was like, someone's going to catch that. It's Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who was a Republican, but who understood democracy, had to retire because she reached the mandatory retirement age.
Right, and the new one, I don't know what she's going to do, Sharon Kennedy. She has a very serious right-wing history. But the state of Ohio, these guys in the legislature, and they're almost all guys, although thankfully one of them has just been sentenced to 20 years for bribery, Larry Householder. But they told the Ohio Supreme Court basically to drop dead. And they told, we had 2 referenda in Ohio demanding fair districts, and they ignored that too. And now the Alabama legislature has ignored the US Supreme Court and refused to do the redistricting in that way. I mean, what do we do when these legislatures just completely ignore the law and ignore the clearly stated wishes of the general public?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to the what do we do, right? Like this is if you go back to Marbury versus Madison, the power of the court is to say what the law is, right? And if we are not listening to courts when they say what the law is, that is a problem with our democracy. So there isn't an easy answer. I think that there are advocacy avenues, right? Like making it impossible not to listen to the public matters. Ohio, I think, is I'm going to call it a cautionary tale for many reasons, including the fact that, like you said, there were 2 referendums that were overwhelmingly positive about reforming the way redistricting happens. And then, when we saw redistricting actually happen and it didn't go particularly well, now there is an effort to actually change how referendum get on the ballot or how initiatives get on the ballot, right? So there's an attack on direct democracy.
And
so yeah, I think,
they're demanding a 60% majority, where in Florida it's already 67%. And it's just infuriating that this is happening. I will say also, by the way, I can't resist that this is happening in Israel. The Netanyahu in the news this morning, I mean, they've had tens of thousands of people in the streets in Israel for weeks. And the news commentator on MSNBC today said if we had equivalent numbers it would be 3 million people in the United States. And Netanyahu has again completely ignored the demand that the Supreme Court not be written out of the process in Israel. So I realize it's a stretch, but we're having the same thing happen here with these decisions. Did you want to add to that before we go to comment?
I don't know enough about Israel to really comment there, but I do think, there are, in the United States and across the world, attacks on popular democracy, right? This is a cyclical thing that happens periodically, and it is up to folks like us who care about democracy and care about repairing it to where it should be. I'm not going to say where it was, but where it should be. I think it's on us to figure out what that solution looks like.
Well, the other thing is the fight is also going on in New York. And can you tell us what's happening in New York?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little bit. So what happened in New York was that there is what's called an independent redistricting commission. It is not that independent, and it is balanced between Democrats and Republicans. So the commission itself was kind of set up to fail. There were maps that were drawn, and there was litigation. A special master was brought in to redraw the maps. And the maps that the special master drew were fine, right? They were not great on some of the details, right? But and I am not in New York, so, I am quoting from my colleagues who know much more about that. But from our analysis, while they missed some of the nuance, they did an okay job representing the people of New York. Those maps were challenged again, this time by Democrats who wanted new maps, who thought that they could be drawn differently. And so there's litigation there. A court of appeals of the Supreme Court, so it's the second level, it's the appellate court in New York, just decided 2 weeks ago that the redistricting commission does need to draw new maps. That the maps drawn by the special master were just a one-time deal. So they are going to be back at the drawing board and in litigation as we move forward.
Okay, let's take some questions. Lynn Feinerman. Lynn, please, and then Wendy. Get you unmuted. We still have 49 people. We're over time, but we'll take this out. This is a very important discussion. I believe Joel Siegel left the call, so we'll get to him next week.
I can't unmute.
You're unmuted. I can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. There's a note that says the host is not allowing me. Thank you for such a great presentation, Suzanne. It was really clear and really helpful. I want to ask how the Common Causes campaign for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact may interact with and be related to what you've explained in Moore v. Harper.
I'm trying to figure out the best way to say all of the pieces. So when we're looking at kind of the underpinnings of the independent state legislature theory, there's the elections clause and the electors clause, both of which have very similar language. So the electors clause is the one that would impact the national popular vote work, right? If that elector, if the Supreme Court had said that the language in the elections clause means that state legislatures can essentially do whatever they want, regardless of outside influences. So like regardless of court review or the state constitution, then it is possible that that language would have meant in the electors clause, which is a different clause, which wasn't an issue in this case, that a state legislature could just appoint its own slate of electors regardless of anything else, right? Regardless of what was happening in the national popular vote work. That didn't happen. So at the moment, there's no concern about that overlap.
Did I answer your question, Lynn? Lynn, are you good there? Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Wendy, Justin, and Jeffrey.
Thank you. Thanks for all your information and all your great presentation. So I'm in Florida, and I don't know, maybe this is a question or it's kind of riding off of what Harvey said before, or just whatever your comments are, but I would just be remiss if I didn't bring this up. Last year, DeSantis, we had the state legislature draw new maps when we gained a seat. And it got constitutional review from the state Supreme Court, was approved, and DeSantis is like, nah, I don't like them. I'm gonna make my own maps. And it was like denied by the state Supreme Court because he was instead of having, like, I think we were at like, what was it, like 16-7 was the ratio, or sorry, 16-11 was the ratio before from red to blue districts, and he made it 20-8. We have 20 red districts and 8 blue districts right now. He did that and overrode the state Supreme Court, and they didn't do anything about it. And the Democratic Party didn't do anything about it. And now the Democratic Party is under new leadership, and they're still not talking about it. And I mean, I know you kind of mentioned it before when Sluggo brought it up about like, what do we do? But I mean, when there's really no pushback from the other side and they're just like allowing these things to happen, I mean, it's a predicament that we're in right now. And I wish more people were talking about Florida. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. And I want to address Florida really quick. I know we're over. So there are 2 pieces of active litigation about the maps in Florida. One in state court, one in federal court. So Common Cause is part of the federal court litigation, and we are charging, or we're challenging, I think, 3 districts, although don't quote me on the number of districts, because they are essentially racial gerrymandering, right? A similar, but not exactly the same piece of litigation is moving in state court, brought by Black Voters Matter and some other groups on the ground that actually just survived a motion for summary judgment. So they're going to be moving forward to trial, which is great. So new maps are still hopefully on the horizon for Florida. The problem with redistricting that like breaks my heart as someone who works on it is that it takes so long to, like redistricting litigation just takes a long time. There's a lot of technical stuff. There's a lot of motions practice, all of that kind of stuff. So that means that people are voting on bad maps for at least one cycle. That doesn't necessarily mean that work isn't being done to fix it. It just means that like in the interim, we are stuck with what we're stuck with, which I hate and haven't figured out how to fix yet.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Justin, Jeffrey, and then we're going to let you go, Suzanne. You've been really great, beautiful presentation, and we still have 46 people with us, so you must be doing something right. Justin, go ahead, and then Jeffrey.
Sure. I wanted to bring up 2 topics. One of them is with the Moore versus Harper, that this ordinary judicial review, my view or interpretation of what's being said there is that, let's say state decides that they want to have very bad maps drawn, unless there is a specific statute in law, as you mentioned, saying that the court can review the reasons for that redistricting, the reasons for those maps, then the state legislature gets preeminence still. That, you know, there's no arbitrary means of striking it down. You have to give specific means of striking it down. And so I don't know if you had any weigh in on that. And the second one is, so related to this interstate popular vote compact, the idea of reappropriation, so that there are actually more districts in most states, and it can be more granular representation of the people.
So I'll take the second one first, which is, I think, an interesting idea. I don't know enough about expanding the size of Congress to really understand how that's going to impact anything, but I will say that it is a thing that I have heard talked about, and I am really interested as a democracy nerd to see how that plays out and to learn more about kind of how all of the nuances fit together. On the first one, I think, yes, right? The short answer is that, like, ordinary judicial review doesn't tell us the four corners of what that means. That being said, I think, you know, our legal team is pretty confident that that language should be, and again, I'm saying should be as if judges are not people who do not sometimes do things that they should not do. And we have all lived through the last several years, right? So full acknowledgement that that language should be enough to, like, maintain what we would normally use state court or court litigation for, right? So things like, you can't just challenge a map because it's challenged, right? Like, there has to be a basis. So things like the free and fair elections clause could theoretically be still used to challenge. So, like, you know, it does not cut off all avenues, right? And yes, there is entirely, you know, a possibility that there's overstep, because we know kind of how the Supreme Court is operating these days, but our lawyers have assured me, as someone who worries all the time about this stuff, that there's enough there that we should feel relatively confident that we're safe.
Good to hear. Thank you so much for that. Last will be Jeffrey, and then we're going to let you go. It's 7:11. We still have 45 people with us. Jeffrey, very briefly, please.
Okay, first off, the Moore versus Harper is about the gerrymandering issue, right? First off.
That was the underlying case, but the actual issue in Moore v. Harper was the independent state legislature theory.
Yeah,
so I was because I was wondering if it can actually help, in the democracy law issue. What do you think, or otherwise known as crimes against democracy? We need, because the world needs something like that, doesn't it?
Moore v. Harper was the idea that the state legislatures could choose their own electors and basically decide the presidential election. Well,
yeah, that's a slightly different case. Yeah, but yes, like, it's that the state legislature didn't have to follow their constitution, essentially. Right. So yeah, to your point, there's absolutely a theme that we're seeing about undermining democracy.
And I think that maybe that should be it. Maybe you should also try. Maybe that should be part of the Roy versus Harper or something like that, you know, crimes against democracy, because we definitely need that.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for that. Mila has raised her hand, and we'll give Mila the last word, and then we'll rock and roll. Thank you, Mila.
Thanks, Harvey. I just wanted to remind people what Tatanka told us about earlier, which is that the Mothers for Peace is asking all of us to sign up early to speak tomorrow at the California Public Utilities Commission's one hearing on the extended operation of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. And I was just typing something in the chats to give people a link to sign up for it. And now I've kind of got too many screens open. Give me 1 minute here and you'll find it in the chat. And there it is. And I also wanted to say, kind of multitasking here, but if you just bear with me for a moment. I've got that in the chat. There's the Mothers for Peace link to sign up for the hearings.
Good.
And then I also want to say that I was on a call with the Progressive Democrats of America yesterday, and they're urging people to support legislation that is co-sponsored by Earl Blumenauer, AOC, and Bernie Sanders, that calls on the Biden administration to address our climate crisis. Unfortunately, it basically calls for giving the Biden administration sweeping powers. And those of us who are fighting against Diablo, someone else is speaking? And those of us who are fighting against Diablo are well aware of the fact that in November of last year, under the using the excuse of addressing the climate crisis, the Biden administration authorized spending up to $1.1 billion on the extended operation of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. So at these hearings tomorrow, we'll be hearing a lot of people who, like the Mothers for Nuclear Power, who are going to be telling us that that we've got to keep Diablo open in order to avert climate crisis, and it's something that we really have to push back against.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Mara. Thank you. And as I pointed out, Mothers for Nuclear Power, there actually is another syllable that comes after the word mother. All right, we'll get Ruth Strauss, and then we're going to go. I believe Suzanne may have left us. Suzanne, if you're gone, thank you much. Ruth, you get the last word, and then we're going to go.
It's a two-syllable word that you were thinking that comes after mother. You know, Mila and Harvey, I went to the last CPUC hearing that was kind of about Diablo, but also was about, you know, they're trying to reduce the rebate for solar. So, you know, I was on the line for like, I don't know, a couple of hours, 100 people spoke. Only one person spoke for nuclear power. Everybody else was against. And at the end of it, the jackasses voted, you know, to keep Diablo open and not, you know, increase the rebate for solar. So do you really think, I mean, I'm happy to do it, but do you really think it's going to make a difference, or what do you think?
You never know, Ruth, but I know exactly what you're saying, and what you say is true. So we'll leave it stand at that.
Okay, I'll do it. Thank you for telling us.
Thank you. You were 100% accurate. All right, you guys, everybody. This has been almost 2.5 hours. We still have 39 people with us. Justin, go ahead, and then let's everybody. We will meet again next week. We'll definitely have Joel Siegel on, and go for it. Justin, what do you got?
So one of the individuals I will be bringing up at the CPUC meeting is a man named Daniel Kamen. He is a professor at Berkeley that has been very much pro rooftop solar. And he actually has a paper on all of that as being part of the SWITCH program to really accelerate the process. I put the links in the chat for anybody who wants that backstory to help assist with your presentation at the CPUC.
Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you, everybody. Another great call. You know, I don't know how to add to it. Thank you, Stephen, Caruso, Wendy, Mike Hirsch, everybody. We will be back next week at the same time. And no nukes. Let's shut them down. Thank you.